The notification came at 11:47 on a Saturday morning. I know the exact time because my phone was face up on the hotel nightstand, and I had been staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes already, too wired to sleep, too exhausted to get up. It was a text from my mother. 4 words. "We're almost there, honey." I read it 3 times before I understood she meant the restaurant, not the venue. Not the convention center 2 blocks away where, in 4 hours, I would be standing at a podium in front of 400 people to accept the National Emerging Researcher Award from the American Society of Environmental Scientists. She meant the brunch reservation she had made at a farm-to-table place 40 minutes outside the city to celebrate my brother's new real estate license. I set the phone down on the nightstand, face down this time. Let me tell you something about that award before I go further. It is not a participation trophy. The ACES gives one per year to a researcher under 35 who has produced work with demonstrable real-world impact in environmental health. That year, I was 29. My nomination had come from my doctoral advisor at the University of Michigan, based on a 2-year study I had led on industrial solvent contamination in residential groundwater near legacy manufacturing sites in the Midwest. 3 communities had used our findings to successfully petition the EPA for remediation funding. Children in 2 of those towns were no longer drinking water with trichloroethylene levels above federal safety thresholds. That was not an abstraction. That was the point. My mother had known about the ceremony for 6 weeks. I had sent her the formal invitation letter from ACES, the hotel information, the date and time, everything. She had responded with a heart emoji and a note that said, "We are so proud of you, Claire Bear." My brother Marcus had gotten his real estate license on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my parents had organized a weekend celebration trip to Savannah because Marcus had always loved Savannah, and my mother said he deserved something special for working so hard. The awards ceremony was also in Savannah. That part had seemed like a gift when I booked the hotel. Now it felt like a joke I was still waiting to understand the punchline of. I got into the shower and stood under the water for a long time. I thought about calling my mother back. I ran through the conversation in my head, her voice going carefully pleasant the way it did when she sensed I was upset, my father in the background making some comment about how I was always so sensitive. I turned the water off and got dressed instead. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been proud of yourself in a room by yourself, with no one else's voice in it, and felt both how good that was and how wrong it was that it had to be enough? That is a specific kind of loneliness. I had been living in it for so long, I had stopped recognizing it as loneliness and started calling it independence. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, the older of 2. Marcus is 3 years younger and was, from the time he was approximately 7 years old, the gravitational center of our family. Not because my parents were cruel people. I want to be clear about that because the easy version of this story has villains, and my parents are not villains. They are people who loved both of their children and were simply better at loving one of them. Marcus was loud in the way that families reward, funny in a way that filled rooms, the kind of kid who made teachers and coaches and neighbors feel like they had discovered something. I was quiet, precise, interested in things that were difficult to explain at dinner. I won a state science competition at 14 and my mother framed the certificate and put it in the hallway. When Marcus scored 3 touchdowns at homecoming his junior year, my parents threw a party for 30 people in the backyard and my father cried. I stopped expecting the parties a long time ago. What I had not stopped expecting, somewhere in the part of myself I had not fully examined, was that something would eventually be large enough to close that gap. I walked to the convention center alone. It was October, warm still, the low Georgia sun slanting gold off the Savannah River, and I was wearing the navy blazer I had bought specifically for this and carrying a small folder with my prepared remarks, and I thought, this is the kind of morning a person should not be walking through alone. A colleague from Michigan, Dr. Yemi Adeyemi, found me in the registration line and fell into step beside me. "Your family get in okay?" she asked. "They're at brunch," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "I'll sit in the front row," she said. I have an extremely loud clap. She was not joking. When they called my name, she produced a sound disproportionate to her size, and I walked to that podium to the echo of it, and I gave my remarks about what the data had meant for those 3 communities, and I said the names of the towns out loud because they deserved to be said, and when I stepped off the stage, Dr. Yemi was standing at the bottom of the steps and she said, "You did that exactly right." My family texted during the reception. My mother sent a photo of a shrimp and grits dish with the caption, "Marcus says hi, we wish you were here," and 3 exclamation points. My father sent a thumbs up emoji that I was not entirely sure was meant for me or had been sent to the wrong thread. Marcus sent nothing at all. I stood at a high-top table in the reception hall with my award in one hand and a glass of sparkling water in the other, and I thought about the particular math of my family, how it had always added up the same way no matter how many times I checked the arithmetic. I thought about the EPA documents I had spent 14 months subpoenaed to produce, the nights in the data lab, the community meetings in church basements in small Ohio towns where I had sat across from parents who just wanted to know if their tap water was safe. I thought about the fact that none of that had made the reception invitation worth responding to. Then I opened my work email, which I was not supposed to be checking at a reception, and there was a message from the director of the Great Lakes Environmental Defense Coalition. Her organization had been following our research and wanted to discuss a staff scientist position leading a long-term monitoring initiative across 5 states. The role was based in Chicago. It was exactly the kind of applied research I had been wanting to move toward for 2 years. The place where data became policy became actual outcomes in actual places. I had been staying in Michigan partly because of proximity. My parents were 7 hours away in Macon, and I had been, without quite naming it, maintaining a geographic relationship with the possibility that things between us would improve. Chicago was not farther from Macon than Ann Arbor, but it felt different in a way I recognized as important. I replied to the director that evening from my hotel room, still in the navy blazer, with my award sitting on the dresser catching the lamplight. I said I was very interested and would like to schedule a call the following week. Then I did something I had been turning over for a long time. I wrote an email to my parents, not an angry one. I am precise by training, and I tried to be precise in that email too. I told them I had accepted the award that afternoon. I told them I was pursuing a position in Chicago. I told them I loved them, and I was not writing the email to assign blame but to be honest, which I had not always been, because honesty had felt like the same thing as asking for something and I had stopped wanting to ask. I told them that I had spent a long time making my expectations small enough to fit into whatever space the family offered, and that I was not able to keep doing that. I said I needed us to figure out how to talk about this, or I was not sure what shape our relationship could have going forward. I sent it at 9:14 p.m. I did not play it 4 times before sending. I sent it once. My mother called within the hour. I let it go to voicemail, not out of avoidance but because I was not ready for a real-time conversation, and I had learned that my mother's real-time responses were not the same as her considered ones. Her voicemail said she did not understand what she had done wrong, that Marcus's license was important too, that I had always been difficult to celebrate because I never let anyone in. My father did not call. Marcus sent a text the following morning that said, "Mom's upset. Can you just call her?" I did not call. I took the job. Chicago suited me in ways I had not anticipated. The coalition office was in a building near the river, 3 floors of researchers and policy analysts and legal advocates who treated environmental contamination data the way I had always wanted it to be treated, as urgent, as actionable, as something that belonged to the communities it affected, and not just to the journals that published it. My director, Lorraine Osei, handed me my project intake on the first day and said, "We have 4 active watershed monitoring sites and 2 in litigation support. You will be bored approximately never." She was correct. I had been in Chicago for 5 months when the intake data from a new site flagged something I was not expecting. The site was a residential corridor on the south edge of Indianapolis, adjacent to a light industrial zone. The flag was for elevated chromium levels in 3 private wells, concentrations above the EPA maximum contaminant level, clustered in a 2-block radius. The pattern was consistent with a point source, meaning something specific was leaking into the groundwater at a specific location rather than a diffuse regional contamination. That narrowed the investigation significantly. The responsible party search took 3 weeks of records work. I pulled environmental impact assessments, industrial operating permits, stormwater management filings, third-party soil testing records. What I found, buried in a voluntary disclosure filing from 4 years earlier that had not resulted in enforcement action, was a company called Whitfield Coal Property Ventures. I sat with that name for a while. My brother Marcus had recently entered a partnership. He had mentioned it once in a brief text exchange, proud of himself, the way he always sounded about things. His partner was a developer named Derek Cole. Together they had been acquiring commercial and light industrial properties in secondary Midwestern markets, converting them for mixed-use development. It was, Marcus had said, Exactly the kind of ground floor opportunity he had been waiting for. Whitfield Coal Property Ventures owned the former machining facility adjacent to the contaminated wells. The prior owners had left behind a documented chromium disposal issue. Whitfield Coal had acquired the property 2 years ago with that disclosure on file. Standard remediation responsibility under federal law meant the current owner was liable for cleanup. The voluntary disclosure 4 years ago had started a process that stalled. Nobody had followed up with enough force to make it move. And in the meantime, 3 families 2 blocks away had been drinking water with chromium levels I would not give to a laboratory mouse. I sat with the conflict of interest question for exactly 1 evening. Then I sent a memo to Lorraine. She read it the same night. In the morning she called me into her office, closed the door, and said, "You are recused from the enforcement recommendation and the public communications. Everything upstream of that is still yours. And Claire, I mean this, thank you for bringing this to me before I found it another way." That night I called Marcus. He picked up on the 4th ring, surprised enough that I could hear it. We had not spoken properly in months. I told him what I had found. I told him specifically. The chromium levels, the prior disclosure, the 3 families, the legal exposure for current property owners. I told him the coalition's legal team was already reviewing the file and that an EPA referral was probable within 60 days. I told him the responsible and significantly less costly path was a voluntary remediation commitment made before enforcement action began. There was a silence I recognized. It was the silence of someone reorganizing their understanding of a situation. "You found this," he said. It was not quite a question. "It's my job," I said. "You could have just not said anything to me." I thought about that for a moment. 3 families are drinking contaminated water, I said. That's not the same conversation. Derek is going to lose his mind. Derek is going to lose a lot more than his mind if this goes to enforcement without a remediation plan on the table. He hung up, not angrily, or not only angrily. There was something else in it, something that sounded like the particular frustration of a person who has just realized the rules they thought applied to other people also apply to them. My parents found out 2 days later. My mother called, and this time I answered. I want to describe that conversation accurately because the easy version is that she was angry and I was calm and the right side won. That is not what happened. She was frightened, which came out as anger the way it always did. She said I had gone looking for this. I said I had not. It was in the dataset. She said I could have referred it to someone else. I said I had recused myself from the enforcement stages. She said Marcus had worked so hard to build something and I was going to tear it down. I said 3 families in Indianapolis deserved clean water and Marcus had legal options available to him right now that would not be available later. "You're doing this because of Savannah," she said. I had been waiting for that. I had been waiting for the moment when the thing I had written in that careful email, the honest thing, got translated back into something small enough to dismiss. I felt something sharpen in me that was not anger and not grief but a third thing, something adjacent to both. "I'm doing this," I said, "because it's my job. And because people are being harmed. I went to you alone and accepted a national award and came home and took a position doing exactly this work. Those are not the same thing as what you're describing." My father got on the line. I heard the transfer. He said, "Your brother made one mistake and you're turning it into a federal case." I almost said, "It is literally a federal case," but I did not because I was trying to be precise and not cutting. What I said was, I gave Marcus advance notice so he could act before enforcement begins. That is the opposite of trying to hurt him. My father said, "You always had to be the serious one." He said it like it was an accusation. I said, "Yes," and I meant it as a statement of fact, and I let the silence sit. The call ended without resolution. They tend to, with my family. But I had said the true thing, and I had not made it small to fit the moment, and that was different from most of the conversations I had survived with them. I documented everything the next morning. Every communication, the timeline of my disclosure to Lorraine, the recusal, the call with Marcus, the call with my parents. I sent a summary to the coalition's legal counsel and our compliance officer with a note that said, "Here is everything, in the order it happened, with no material omitted." The enforcement process moved the way those processes move, which is deliberately and without drama. The EPA referral went through. Whitfield Coal received a compliance order 63 days after my memo to Lorraine. Marcus and his partner retained environmental counsel. They submitted a voluntary remediation plan 8 days after the compliance order, which my attorney explained was the right strategic move and would likely reduce their civil exposure substantially. The remediation of the contaminated site began the following spring. The 3 families on that corridor were connected to municipal water in the interim, a temporary measure that cost Whitfield Coal approximately what Marcus had described to me as a painful but survivable number. I did not feel like I had won something. I want to be clear about that because the winning version of this story would be simpler to tell and would also be false. What I felt was the particular exhaustion of having done a complicated thing correctly. I had found something I did not look for. I had disclosed it immediately. I had recused myself from the parts I should not touch. I had warned my brother before the consequences became irreversible. The outcome was not mine to engineer. It was something I had declined to obstruct. My mother sent a card. An actual card, the kind you buy at a drugstore, with a generic watercolor landscape on the front. Inside in her handwriting she had written that Marcus was very stressed, and she hoped I was okay and that she thought about calling me more than she actually called. At the bottom, in smaller letters, she wrote, "I think maybe we don't always understand what your work means. I'm not sure we knew what to do with how serious you always were." I read that many times. I noticed what it was and what it was not. It was something close to acknowledgement, the first movement toward honesty my mother had offered in a long time. It was not an apology. It did not say they should have been in Savannah. It did not say the award mattered. It said they had not understood. Understanding and accountability are not the same thing. But I had spent a long time waiting for one before the other, and I was tired of that sequence. I wrote back. I told her I appreciated the card. I told her I was open to real conversation, the kind where we talked about the actual things instead of the comfortable surface of them. I told her I hoped Marcus and Derek found their way through the situation. I signed it with my full name, Claire Harmon, the name I had been born with and had kept, the name my grandmother on my father's side used to say in full when she called me on my birthday, the name that had always been mine even when I felt like a stranger in the family it connected me to. Marcus called 3 weeks later. It was a short call. He said the remediation was on track. He said Derek was still furious. He said, "I know you didn't do this on purpose." I said, "I know you know that." He said, "It still sucked." I said, "I know." There was a pause, and then he said, "That award, in Savannah." I Googled it after. "That's a big deal, Claire." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry we missed it." It was the first direct apology anyone in my family had offered, and it came from the person I had most expected to dig in, and I did not know what to do with it in the moment except hold it carefully, the way you hold something that might break. I still work at the coalition, Dr. Yemi visited Chicago last spring for a conference and we had dinner and I told her the whole story, all of it, and she listened in that complete way she has and at the end she said, "You did every part of that exactly right too." I told her I was not sure about that. She said, "Right doesn't mean painless." That has stayed with me. I have a small apartment near the lake. I run in the mornings along the waterfront, and sometimes I think about what it cost to become someone whose first instinct, even with family money on the line, was to open the disclosure memo and send it to my supervisor before the end of the day. I think about those 3 families in Indianapolis drinking clean water now. I think about the version of me who would have transferred the file and said nothing and kept the peace, and how long that version of me could have lived inside a peace that was only ever one-sided. I talk to my mother every few weeks now. The conversations are still careful, still feeling their way towards something more honest. My father and I have not found that path yet. Maybe we will. Maybe the distance is the right shape for now. Here is what I know that I did not know at 29, standing in a hotel room with an award on the dresser and a voicemail I could not make myself play twice. When you spend your life being the serious one, the capable one, the one who handles things, some people in your life will mistake that capability for an unlimited resource. They will draw on it without asking. They will be surprised, genuinely surprised, when it turns out you have been keeping a ledger too. You are allowed to be the serious one and to also require something in return. Those 2 things do not cancel each other out. You are allowed to do the hard thing and to grieve the cost of it at the same time. And here is the question I will leave you with, because I think it is the question I was not asking myself for a very long time. If the people in your life have come to expect your best without offering you theirs, if they have counted on your integrity while remaining comfortable in their own absence, what would it look like to stop organizing your life around their ease? And if you let yourself really sit with that question honestly, what do you think the answer looks like?